We live in a society where that should be precedent, and no gender or ethnicity should be placed above another. Today we'll be talking about why the feminist movement should reject affirmative action on the behalf of females in Western liberal democracies. Today I'm going to be discussing with you why, because of the principles of feminism, it goes against feminism to accept affirmative action for females. And my second speaker is going to go on to explain as to why this undermines and undervalues women in the modern world and the major disadvantages that this then poses to other minorities. However, before I get on with my constructive, I'd like to give a few definitions so we don't end up in a definitional debate today. We define the feminist movement as the group of people who advocate the principle of equal rights for women through the means of things like protest, sit-ins, and work to rule. We define oppose as to publicly denounce and stand against. We define affirmative action as the process by which women are legally given a strategical advantage for reaching the end goal and applying for things such as college places, scholarships, and employment. We say that we define liberal as when a society favors progress, reform, and individual freedoms in social, economic, and political matters, democracies as countries where governments are elected by the people, and Western as to include places such as the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. We feel that today Team Opposition has a burden to prove to us and to you that in Western liberal democracies, affirmative action for women is going to aim with the end goal of ending with a more equal society where gender doesn't matter. Our burden today is pretty simple, to prove that that is not true and that it will not lead to a more equal society. So, to get on with my constructive about why this actually goes against the fundamentals of feminism. So, first of all, let's ask ourselves the question, what are the fundamentals of feminism? They're the basic principle that in no situation should the gender of a woman or a man actually matter. This is in cases such as sports, such as employment, and scholarships. No, thank you. This is because they believe that equality in the modern world is incredibly important and should be in its purest form. Therefore, let's take an example. If two people apply for a job, the more skilled of the two people should get the job, regardless of their gender. Affirmative action advocates for giving the one-up to a certain group of people, in this situation, to women. Whilst feminism advocates for almost blind equality, of not discriminating positively or negatively on a woman's behalf. Therefore, we see a huge conflict of interest between feminism and affirmative action. It actually undermines the cause that feminism strives to achieve. Yes?
When 3% of the world's CEOs are female, can you tell me why a movement that supports the empowerment of women would not want that stat to change?
We would not want that. Well, of course we would want that stat to change. We completely promote equality. However, affirmative action does not promote equality. It promotes the one-ing up of a certain gender. And when one person is not equal to another, that is not equality. So therefore we see that with feminism, that when you employ affirmative action on the behalf of women, you actually undermine their cause. Because essentially what you're saying, no thank you, is the work that they have done to date has not been enough. The work that they will continue to do tomorrow and the next day after will not be enough to achieve the goal of equality. No thank you. We are also saying that their work is not effective or efficient enough, which we completely deny. We believe that in a relatively short amount of time, feminism has increased a great amount. Yes.
Do you believe that post-apartheid South Africa, the government should not try to correct wrongs of the past and empower people of color?
We do believe that in that special situation that is true. However, when it comes to women, women are not a minority. In the world, and especially in the Western world, women and men are split if no thank you. No thank you. We see that women and men are essentially split halfway through when it comes to population. Therefore, we do not see women as actually being a true minority. We also see that when you employ affirmative action, you end up saying that the work that they are doing, the work they continue to do, is not enough. To advocate them to support this would to essentially say that they are not good enough, which is not what we, no thank you, which is not what we say. What I would like to highlight today, no thank you, thus far, is that we are not against feminism. We are not against equality. In fact, we promote this, which is why we are proposing this motion that we should not allow affirmative action. Under the law, if a woman is being discriminated against in the workplace, that company is liable charges of discrimination that can come about if you do not hire someone or you fire someone based on their gender. Under the law, a man and a woman are equal. Feminists advocate for this. However, affirmative action does not. Therefore, we see this as actually being a blanket policy, implying that all women are being discriminated against in the workplace, and that all women are not able to actually work towards their goals by themselves. Through this, we then see a reinforcement of stereotypes. We see the women, again, you're reinforcing the idea that women are not good enough by themselves, that they need the help of a man, and that they need the help of someone else in order to reach their goals. Does this sound like feminism, ladies and gentlemen? No, it does not. No, thank you. We would say that this is actually counter-feminism, because you're saying that a woman is not good enough, and that is not what feminism is about. In the modern world, it is not acceptable. Thank you. It is not acceptable to say that a woman cannot reach something by herself. This is possibly one of the worst attacks on feminism if we really think about it, of affirmative action, saying that women, because of your gender, you are different and you no thank you, and you are not able to do something by yourself. That does not equate to feminism. This is a debate between fair and equal. It may be fair, however, it is not equal, and equality is not. No, thank you. And equality is what feminism strives for. Let's take an example of today. If there was an all-girls team in this debate, would you advocate for them to skip around and get a win simply because they're women? That is what affirmative action, no thank you, that is what affirmative action asks for. You would then probably, no thank you, you would then probably make the assumption, well, why did that happen? Is it because they're not good enough? No thank you. Is it because they're not good enough? Is it because they couldn't debate well enough to do that by themselves? We say that this reinforces the negative stereotypes. You wouldn't advocate for simply in my team we're all girls to be Team South Africa unless we were good enough. Therefore, we believe that modern society should be based on skill. We believe that it should not be based on gender, because gender should not matter. Therefore, we do not advocate for affirmative action, and we do not advocate that feminism should accept affirmative action, because it is counterproductive, it goes against their principles, and therefore should not be done. So we thank you, and that is what we will continue to propose today, because somebody accepting something that goes against their principles is fundamentally wrong. Thank you.
Recognizing the wrongs of the past isn't the same thing as telling people that they're not good enough. It's recognizing that the society isn't good enough and trying to fix that society. Because the fact that 3% of the world's CEOs are women is a broken society. They've given you absolutely no analysis as to how that society is going to be fixed, except by saying that the feminism movement is about ignoring gender. Ladies and gentlemen, the feminist movement isn't about ignoring gender. It's using gender and trying to reach, by whatever mechanism they can, a situation whereby gender doesn't decide how your life is going to play out for you. That is how it's working at the moment. But before, we bring you 4 arguments in today's debate. Firstly, I'm going to be talking to you about why this is the only principally just thing for the state to do. Secondly, I'm going to be dealing with the long-term and short-term effects. My second speaker will be dealing with female perceptions, and secondly, using femininity as an advantage. Before I get onto my rebuttal, let's just ground today's debate in reality with some actual context. So we say that there's an incredible amount of stigma on women at the moment. They're perceived as weak. This is something that's historically induced because in the past, women haven't been able to work. So there's a perception that women are fragile, that things must be given to them, and that they must stay at home and look after their children. That's why 3% of the CEOs are female. That's why only 10% of all the heads of state in the world are women. It's not because women are just bad at being authoritative, it's about the society not allowing them to get into certain positions. The second point of context we bring you today is that we actually haven't haven't seen any real organic change or progression in the society. We say that the only societies where we've seen an actual progression are the kind of societies that implemented the policy that they're trying to take out. After Sweden implemented a quota based on gender to do with female judges, we saw a 60% increase in female law students, because there is now some sort of prospect, there is now some sort of goal, and one can therefore work towards achieving that goal. The third point of context that we bring you is that there is an equal amount of talent between women and men, right? So we've seen an overwhelming large amount of cases, the highest ranking students are consistently female. This has happened in 2013, 2012, and 2014 in the UK. The best student, ladies and gentlemen, was female. What can we deduce from this? Is that between the two groups of men and women, because there's such an equal amount of people in each group, we would argue that there is an equal amount of talent in each group. We think that we're not necessarily majorly degrading the workforce if we impose this kind of thing. Let's also add a criteria in today's debate for when we support or for when the feminist movement should support something. And we say that's majorly when this furthers female freedom in some sort of way. There are three criteria. Firstly, when it furthers opportunities for women. Secondly, when it furthers choice for women. And thirdly, when it furthers the woman overall empowerment. Lastly, let's just deal with how this kind of policy actually works. Because it's not a finite policy that exists for the rest of time, it just exists up until some sort of balance or some sort of equality in society is reached. It doesn't last forever, I don't think. So, let's get on to the very limited amount of rebuttal that I have in today's debate about how gender should never matter as a feminist goal, because that goes against the very basis of feminism. Which just tells you that that's just not true. The very basis of feminism is trying to achieve equality. They use gender all the time as a mechanism for trying to achieve that means. No, thank you. In terms of criticizing the feminist movement, we don't think that that applies in today's debate either. We think that ultimately the feminist movement isn't trying to get some sort of acknowledgement from the rest of society. It's trying to get some sort of tangible reaching of their ultimate goal. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're doing. So, let's move on to my first point of positive matter about about the principle in today's debate. Because we tell you that government has an obligation to fix society, to help society. So, when we have a major disenfranchised group like women are, we would argue that government has an obligation to try and fix that disenfranchisement and to try and help women as much as possible. We say that this includes wrongs that were committed in the past, but the effects of those wrongs have continued to the future. As long as people continue to be affected by this kind of thing, we would argue that government has an obligation to try and fix this. Now, what does this mean? I will take you in a moment. It means that government has a direct obligation to try and implement these kind of strategies to fixing that problem, yes.
But ma'am, how can women be so disenfranchised when you spent 2 minutes talking about how they are equal in skill set in high school graduation?
That's the point. Because of the fact that, okay, well, this is going into my later analysis, but let's go on to my next layer of analysis, which is the short-term effects. And essentially what we tell you is that the reason behind the fact that women can't get up higher within society is because that kind of power society is monopolized by men. It's natural for men to try and want to hire other men because they see themselves in them and it's easier for them to trust themselves. When we implement this kind of policy, we change that kind of mechanism, right? We get women into positions that they need to be in, and we get them there so that they are then able to hire other women. That's how we achieve actual equality within our society. You have to respond to the reality that we have in today's debate. So, in terms of short-term effects, when we implement this kind of thing, we see three results. Firstly, we say that we just make women now more self-reliant. We get women jobs, we get women the ability to work, and we create a certain amount of economic freedom for these women. We think this just means that they have to rely on men less within society. Secondly, we change the immediate perception of people, right? Because there's some sort of tangible way now in which women can prove that they are better, in which women can prove that they are capable of being in high positions. So, when a woman can now go to work and can show people that she is doing a good job, we start to remove the stigma that's hurting them so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we allow them to prove themselves. Let's move on to the second effect, though, about the long-term effects that we actually create. And the first thing that we tell you is we just change the long-term stigma that exists about women. So more than just changing the idea that women are always ineffective, we start to actually elevate the positions or the net positions of women in society. Because you start to like them. We implement the perception that women can be authoritative, that they can be in positions whereby they're in control of the people and they can do so well. That's incredibly important if we want to achieve the most equal society possible. Yes.
As you pointed out earlier, you were saying that apparently this policy will make women more independent. But how will it make them more independent when you're giving them a one-up and essentially giving them the job?
by themselves. Let's just analyze how independence works. It's not how you get there, it's once you're there what you can do with that amount of freedom. At the moment, they do not have any mechanism to get into independence. You have to show us why the change that you're talking about is actually going to happen and why I'm not just stuck in this kind of position. But once you have independence, it means that you don't have to rely on your husband to pay your taxes anymore. It means that you have the opportunity to go and study further because you have the money to go and study further. That's incredibly important. You have to deal with that level of analysis too. So, ladies and gentlemen, more than that though, we change the perception that women and children always have to be associated with one another. We stop forcing women into the position of woman at home. That's incredibly important given the fact that 85% of the resignations that we've seen come from women wanting to go and work at home, wanting to go and raise children at home. That's incredibly damaging if we want women to continue to exist within a workplace, if we want women to continue to be able to make money for herself so that she's not forced into certain positions by societal perceptions. That's incredibly important, and we change the long-term perceptions in that way as well. And lastly, we just change the perception that women are always weak and that they can never reach some sort of level of authority. So ladies and gentlemen, what have we essentially shown? A, we've shown you that women can be in a position of authority without hurting the rest of society. B, that they won't be in this position of authority, however, unless we implement something that's actually going to get them there. And 3, that ladies and gentlemen, we help women, we have the capacity. Now we can smash the patriarchy. I'm very proud to stand beside our proposition.
Thank you very much for the speech. I would like to welcome the second speaker on the government side to further expand on your case.
Ladies and gentlemen, the motion that we as Team Proposition present today is that this House believes that the feminist movement should oppose affirmative action for women in Western liberal democracies. Now, today I'll be talking about how the feminist movement would view affirmative action for women in a Western liberal democracy as something that undermines women in general. Firstly, by showing that it suggests that women need extra help from things that aren't already covered under the law and in liberal society. And secondly, by showing how it undermines women and the accomplishments that they've made today without the help of affirmative action. Now, let me first rebut some of the points that Team Opposition has made today. Today what we've heard from Team Opposition is the advocation for affirmative action for women. They've talked about how women aren't equal, how there are less women CEOs, and all forth a bunch of interesting statistics about how women are disadvantaged and yet have equal talent. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start by saying that's not what this motion is about. This motion isn't about advocating or going against affirmative action. It's about looking at it from a feminist point of view and what feminists advocate for affirmative action. So when we look at this from the perspective and the context of this motion, we have to consider not what we as Team Proposition or we as Team Opposition or we as moral human beings would think, but what a feminist would think, being that their principles, not at this time, would be against equality. So let's look at what they've said so far. I'm still rebutting your point. Now, not at this time. Now, one of the funniest things that they said was that affirmative action makes women more reliant. But they brought forth statistics about how women are not in charge in society and how men are monopolistic. So what they're advocating for is a policy implemented by men, mostly in government, that gives women a one-up. And then somehow that makes them more independent. We ask, how would a bunch of males sitting in a government giving women a one-up make that woman more self-reliant? Wouldn't the role of that woman and the feminist movement advocating for equality not based on gender but on their own merit? Wouldn't they advocate making strides in society in a Western liberal democracy where they already have the basics such as the same basics that men have, such as an education, such as the right to apply for jobs, such as the similar economic backgrounds, wouldn't they advocate that a woman being independent means going and getting that job off of her own merit, rather than because some policy said that she should get it just because she's a woman? We completely rebut this point and believe that it's null and void. Now, we also know that they talk about how women are disadvantaged in society and in the world. We know that this is Western liberal democracies. We're talking about democracies and societies where women are equal to men under the law. These are places where there was statistics about high school graduation. These are places where women statistically drop out less than men, where women statistically get a better and higher education than men, and where men are disadvantaged in this sense. So, not at this time. So when we look at a Western liberal democracy where everyone, men and women, have the basic right to education, how can they really state that women don't have the independence and the basic foundation to fight for their own rights? Not at this time. I'd like to go off my point. Now, let's look at how feminists would say that affirmative action undervalues them. When we look at the status quo in Western liberal democracies, women are already considered equal under human rights law. Thus, a feminist would recognize that legally, women and men are equal. We understand that this may not be the case in practice, but legally, women and men are equal. So their approach to enforcing equality would not be to advocate for a policy that highlights women and generalizes them based on their gender, because affirmative action suggests that someone comes from a background because of relatives. Not this time. Because affirmative action suggests that someone requires affirmative action based on a background inherent to them, such as maybe a black person where the black population traditionally comes from lower economic backgrounds or traditionally receives a poorer education. But we don't see that with women in general, because you have women that come from all sorts of spectrums, whether it be race, economic backgrounds, etc. That means that just because of somebody is a woman, they don't come from a poor background. Would you not agree?
Do you believe that women and men currently have equal opportunities in society?
No, we don't, ladies and gentlemen. We don't believe that women and men currently have equal opportunities in society. However, that does not mean that a feminist would advocate for equal, for affirmative action. Here's how. Because if under the law, a woman and a man are equal, but in practice they are not equal, why would a woman advocate that they should get something because they're a woman? Wouldn't they advocate, first of all, that the law be upheld, not at this time, that the law be upheld so that if they didn't get a job or are equally qualified for that job, then they should have that right to apply and to dispute that? Ladies and gentlemen, what we say is that a feminist would advocate receiving benefits such as jobs or scholarships, not based solely on their gender, because that's a policy that puts them at an advantage over others by earning benefits regardless of gender. So let's look at a hypothetical situation in which a woman and a man apply for a job with equal qualifications. With affirmative action, the woman would get that job simply for being a woman. A feminist would disagree with this, not only because it makes the woman and man unequal, but also because the public perception of that woman will be that she only got that job because she's a woman, regardless of whether or not that's true. Why is this against feminism on a large scale? That ties into my second point, that it's bad because it undermines the past accomplishments made by women without affirmative action. We understand that in practice there are women and men that are unequal. However, affirmative action is not the way to solve this, and a feminist would not argue that either, because they've made so many accomplishments without the help of affirmative action in such a short amount of time. What accomplishments? Evidence is in the suffrage movement. Evidence is such as the first congresswoman being appointed in 1960, the first female governor in 1924, progress that has been made all the way up to the first House leader in 2007, and now the possibility of a female president of the United States. So we understand on team proposition that men and women are not equal, but we also have to recognize that women have made the strides that they have made and continue to make the strides that they make towards equality, not because of some policy that gives them a one-up, but because they fight in their own rights and based on their own opportunity and based on their own qualifications without the need for someone saying, here's a one-up just because of your gender. So they would say that they made great strides without affirmative action that led them to a point where they are now more equal and they continue to become more equal in society. Would you not agree?
Ultimately, the goal of the feminist movement is to achieve an equal society. Do you not agree?
No, firstly, that's incorrect. The ultimate goal of a feminist is to see that a woman is not discriminated against based on her gender. That's not about making that in society, but it's about the woman. It's about a woman being equal to a man and not being discriminated against positively or negatively based on solely their gender. It's not about an equal society, but about equal men and women in particular. So, finally, let's look at how a feminist movement wouldn't advocate for affirmative action because of the effect it would have on other minorities. The status quo is that blacks, Hispanics, particularly black and Hispanic males, receive affirmative action in Western liberal democracies. Many minorities are minorities not because of their gender, but because of other backgrounds, whether it be economic backgrounds, historical backgrounds, etc. So when we look at a hypothetical situation in which you have a white woman and a black male applying for the same job, affirmative action would advocate that woman getting the job because somehow she's been disadvantaged because she's a woman. But it completely ignores the fact that one, not all women come from poor or disadvantaged backgrounds, and two, not all women are given a one down just because they're a woman. So we see that there are other minorities that are true minorities because of their ethnicity, because of their economic background, that doesn't apply specifically to women. So when you advocate affirmative action for women, you're generalizing women by suggesting that all women come from, or most women come from a disadvantaged background, whether it be economically or opportunity-wise. Now, having stated that more women graduate from high school than males, we see that they have the basic foundation to fight for their rights on their own without the help of a one-up. And so we see that from a feminist point of view, who advocates that things shouldn't happen just because of someone's gender, they would advocate equality in its own right and not based on a gender. And that's why exactly we propose this motion today.
Thank you very much for the speech. I would like to welcome the second speaker on the opposition bench to the further defense of their arguments.
Today we have a signed proposition that claims to advocate for equality of women and it has no effective means of ensuring this. A signed opposition whose burden was explicitly to show that our policy doesn't have an end goal where gender doesn't matter, but then goes on to talk about the means of this rather than the end result. A signed proposition who hasn't fulfilled their burden and currently uses this debate. So according to our criteria, when we told you that one of the key points of the feminist movement was equality, my main issue with us today is this idea of equality. We are recognizing feminist movements and looking at it from their perspective. So let's look at this idea of equality and the problems with affirmative action that side proposition raised in the debate. And we said the first one was that the means of affirmative action were not equal to gain some sort of equality, and that was the inherent problem with affirmative action, because they said that women are now treated preferentially. So we see that by the burden that they imposed on us, firstly, we see that their goal, they wanted our end goal to be gender equality. And we said through our policy, we actually achieved this. We prioritize equality as an end result. We want an equal society at the end of the day, and our policy is the only one with an effective means of getting there, of achieving this goal. And they actually accepted that affirmative action can achieve this goal when they conceded the POI in their first speaker's speech about BEE in South Africa and how that's a good idea. So we see that we do achieve equality at the end of the day. This is the goal of feminism. This is what side proposition stands for. But let's say they didn't impose this burden on us. We move on to what the nature of affirmative action is. And we see that what affirmative action does is it works proportional to the parties involved. So let's look at our South African model. We see that BEE is created according to the proportion of the races in our country. So if there's X percentage of black people in our country, they get X percentage preferential treatment. We see that because there are two genders in society, that means we get 50-50. So the means is actually equal in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. We're promoting 50% for women, 50% for men in the workplace, something that we're not seeing in today's society, and something that can actually improve the 3% of CEOs to maybe 50% of CEOs, something that we strongly stand for in today's society. But regardless of this, we see that women are still regarded as equal in terms of capability under our model. We see that women aren't undermined by promoting affirmative action. And the reason for this is that affirmative action is ensuring the provision of opportunity. So yes, if we had an all-girls team entering this competition, we would give them that opportunity. That doesn't mean that they get preferential treatment in this tournament. No, ladies and gentlemen. That simply means they get the opportunity to enter this tournament, the opportunity to compete, the opportunity to show their capabilities. something we've shown that women actually don't have in today's debate. So we see that on these three levels, the idea of the problem with the means of affirmative action actually falls, that problem no longer exists. Let's move on to the second problem, the idea of men implementing the problem and that being a problem of this. We said that firstly, a side that wants to forget about gender so much simply can't prioritize the idea that men are implementing this, therefore it's a problem. If you want to forget about men, let's forget about them altogether. But even if we were regarding them, we see that it actually shows that men are recognizing the value of women in today's debate. Men see that they actually should, that women are actually capable, women can actually do the job, and that they want to break the society, break this idea, and get women into the workplace, in government, because that's government's responsibility to do so. And then on the third level of analysis, we say that by feminist movement supporting affirmative action, by feminist movement saying that affirmative action is good, we see that this affirmative action cause is actually driven by women from the start. That's what they wanted. They wanted women to be promoting this. And on our side, as per the motion, if women are promoting affirmative action, then essentially at the end of the day, it's also being promoted by women. We achieve their goals as well as ours. Our policy still stands. And then the third problem they identified in today's debate was this idea that there was no harm to women. Not all women are economically disadvantaged or something, therefore there's no need for this policy. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, not all women are equally disadvantaged economically, but they are equally disadvantaged by societal stigma against women, ladies and gentlemen. That is a distinct disadvantage that they didn't recognize in today's debate. They conceded that this disadvantage existed when they said that there were unequal opportunities for women in today's society. They conceded that women aren't treated equally, that society doesn't value women as equal, and then they claimed that there was no disadvantaged woman. Ladies and gentlemen, that's an inherent contradiction on their case, something that there is a harm to women, there is a problem that we need to redress in society, something that we stand for, and we think that there's quite a confusion about what they're promoting in today's debate in terms of the principle of feminism. And just like to quote something the second speaker said, they said that feminism isn't about achieving an equal society, it's about ensuring that women aren't discriminated against. Ladies and gentlemen, if women aren't discriminated against, that means they're regarded as equal, that means that men and women are regarded as equal, that means that's what feminism is supporting. They essentially support feminism as well. So now I'd like to move on to my substantive matter, where we'll be dealing with two issues in today's debate. Firstly, the idea of women's perception of themselves, and secondly, of the feminine advantage. So let's look first at the idea of women's perception of themselves. And here I'll prove to you that affirmative action will improve and empower younger women that they can actually be successful in society. So let's look at the current perception, something that they concede in today's debate. And we see also that as women move up in the schooling ladder, we see that there's an increasing number of them who lose interest in becoming professionals, ladies and gentlemen. Why is this? Studies by universities such as Harvard and Oxford reveal that women lose incentive due to the limited scope of opportunities in today's debate. They lose incentive because of societal stigma, something they consider to. It's a proven fact that 70% of schoolgirls just start in high school, want to become professionals like mathematicians, like scientists, but by the time they end school, ladies and gentlemen, that number drops to 12%. A massive drop in the belief in women that they can actually become successful. So how does our policy change this? Firstly, what it does, it guarantees that there's some sort of opportunity for women, somewhere where they can go. And secondly, it creates more female role models, more females getting into the workplace, more females inspiring younger people, less of the indoctrination. So we see that they're feel a bit more comfortable about themselves, about their capability. And this is important as it addresses the main items of today's debate, women, empowering how women feel about themselves. Tell me why you don't support empowerment, sir.
The benefits that you present about affirmative action are all fine and dandy, but if a feminist doesn't want to be highlighted because of their gender, because they think that gender shouldn't matter, why would she advocate for a policy that highlights them and puts them at an advantage just because of their gender?
So, what we see in today's debate is that women want to be equal in society, and the way that equality is achieved is through equal opportunities. They have been highlighted in society by being disadvantaged. The only way to get rid of this highlight is to make women equal in society, to make them have equal opportunities and achieve equal things to men. And we see that therefore our policy actually facilitates gender no longer to be a matter. We can't pretend like now it's not a matter in today's society. It is. It's something we want to change on the long term, ladies and gentlemen. And then I'd like to move on to my final idea, this idea of feminine advantage. And there are two sub-issues here. Firstly, I'd like to say that we would like to create a societal perception that women actually are capable. Because we see that by women not being given opportunities, opportunities, it means that they aren't given the opportunity to counter societal stigmas of women being inferior. And what affirmative action actually does is it gives women an opportunity to show their into the workplace and show their capability. And when women do the job properly, it shows that they truly are capable, and that is a good thing. And we see that this is particularly important because it mitigates the harm that they identified in today's debate of women being shown as less important because of affirmative action. We see that this is a contradictory directly to their case. I strongly stand with the side where we say that women have the capability, and now we are going to smash this patriarchy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for the speech. I'd like to welcome the third speaker on the government side to deliver the
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, judges, honorable opponents, and my teammates. Today it seems that we have a lot of confusion about what we're arguing, where we are, where we're going, and who's advocating for who. So let me take the time to try and explain all of that and clarify it for you to make it crystal clear why we have won this debate today. And I aim to do that by breaking it down into what team proposition and team opposition supports and doesn't support, where does the problem actually begin, and how do we actually solve it effectively, and lastly, what is the goal of this debate? Because I think that needs to be answered clearly as well. So I'm going to do this by going through each argument in an orderly fashion just to see where and how we have come up on top each time. So starting with the first speaker on team opposition. Their main point was that the feminist goal in this context is to establish independence for the women, to establish equality, and to fix this global stigma that we seem to have on women. We say, okay, we admit that in this context, in Western democracies, some women are disadvantaged, but that's it, some. And we cannot determine which one of those, which groups are. And because of that, we cannot just put a blanket policy on all of these women. And I'm going to explain that again, just as we have done in this debate, not at this time. We cannot do that, one, because that means that as the feminist movement strongly fights against, that means that women are not equal in this world, and we are intervening and putting them a level up in the workforce, in education, where they do not need that extra push, because that takes away their independence. We see this as the first major contradiction in team opposition's case. We see that if a woman aims to be independent, they need to act alone. And therefore, the government's actions legally, which is how we define affirmative action, by the way, should not have anything to do with that journey, not at this time. We see that in order to gain their freedom, as it were, which we're not actually debating, or more appropriately, in order to gain equal opportunities in this world, we have to show the world and society that they are deserving of those opportunities. And the way to do that is not by telling employers and institutions that they are, but letting the women shine for themselves. And as we have clearly pointed out on numerous occasions in our case, why would the feminist movement want to have a policy that illustrates the disadvantages that they're in an attempt to help them prove that they're not disadvantaged and how this will not detriment their future progress? Yes?
You're currently a side that has conceded that there is an issue where women don't have equal opportunities. You're a side that claims to be feminist. Tell us now about your efficacy that fixes the problem as women.
Okay, you're right on one of those 2 points, sir. We are a side that advocates on behalf of a feminist group. We are actually not the feminists, and that is where we think the confusion is in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. We see that time and time again, team proposition has come to you and said that we are feminists, and therefore we must actually argue for equality. We say that this is not the case. We say that the motion before us is that the feminists would oppose this and should oppose this, and we have argued those reasons. We are not to be confused with actual feminists, ladies and gentlemen, and we think that this needs to be a precedence in that fact. Because feminists fundamentally disagree, it is a contradiction to their policies and their movements. Why? Because none of this time. Because a feminist argues for the equal placement of women in the future, not because of a third-party, not because of a third-party policy, but because of those women's capabilities alone. And I'm going to further develop this as I go on. Secondly, we saw that the second speaker talked about how this is the only measure, and I want to highlight this fact, the only measure that we can use to change public perception. We have major contention with this, ladies and gentlemen, because what team opposition is pointedly saying is society will automatically recognize women's values and their work just because they gain another CEO position or just because they climb the corporate ladder. Not at this time. We fundamentally disagree with this. We think that, as we have presented in our numerous occasions, that through their own efforts, through gaining the qualifications that they get, first congresswoman, CEO, first chair, all of these high-end opportunities because they themselves worked up despite the discrimination that was present. This is more noteworthy and this is more important than introducing a policy that says, you know what, there are two people in this room and one is a woman, and I don't want to take this opportunity away from them, so I'm going to give it to them. No. We say that one, that's wrong because you're taking into consideration the wrong thing, their gender, and two, you're also taking the job away from, not this time, away from someone who might be more deserving regardless of their gender. And we find this is where the principal problem lies, not at this time. Moving on to the most contentious point that they brought forward, that this will change how men see women. Like our second speaker brought to your attention, how will men giving women this new policy and this new opportunity change how other men view those women? It won't. It will simply say to other men that because other men told us that we have to look at these women a different way, or that we have to accept them into society by this rule, we must comply. That doesn't actually address the psychological mindset that they have already, that the woman is either not worthy of the position because they are unfortunately a woman, which we cannot really comment on, but secondly, because they are not actually qualified. And we think that if they're not qualified, they shouldn't be in the debate. We think that we're talking about the feminists saying that when people are equally qualified, we say that affirmative action should not come into play because it gives the employer or the person who is thinking about letting them in a different perspective that shouldn't even be there, as a feminist movement would have it. We see that over this debate, not at this time, please stop trying to interrupt my sentence. We're trying to say that the feminist movement would try to establish a world whereby women are women and men are men. But in the opportunities that they both try to pursue, both are equal in that attempt, and nothing besides their skill set is going to matter. And we believe that if one woman, we believe that this, the stance that team opposition has taken is quite contradictory because if the woman, if this is their aim, and we both agree on this, then affirmative action only highlights the reason why we are having this discussion. Yes.
Currently in society, women are not women and men are not men because men actively hire men over women. There is a stigma against women in the working force. Tell us how you deal with that on your side of the house.
Well, we on Team Proposition don't believe that this is the only way to address that. In fact, we think that this is the wrong standpoint coming from a feminist point of view. Again, we want to stress that. Because if men are going to hire men because they feel that for some reason they're more trustworthy or they're more qualified, this policy, again, is not going to psychologically change that view. It's going to legally change that view. And we see that as ineffective and unsustainable. And it's not addressing the real issue, that women are inferior because one, they might be, they have less skills, which they actually disprove because they have equal opportunities and are more likely to graduate, but two, that they are not, men. And this is not what we assume or propose is the solution. We think that you have to start at the root and not this pointed measure. And that is why we believe this motion must go and shall stand. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, 84% of women are more likely to resign from their positions. Of the Forbes top 50 corporates in the world, only 5 CEOs of those corporates are female. There is a very definite bias against women in our societies, and a very pervasive, insidious perception that undermines women at every turn. But of course, we already know that, right? Because side proposition conceded it earlier when they told you that they don't think men and women have equal opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, side proposition is going to lose today's debate because in a debate about feminism, equality, and empowering women, they did not understand 1, feminism, 2, equality, or 3, provide a mechanism for empowering women. But over and above that, I'll tell you that their entire case is flawed when they 1, conceded that women don't have equal opportunities to men, 2, conceded the legitimacy of our mechanism when they conceded that post-apartheid black economic empowerment was legitimate, and then 3, couldn't give you an efficacy to fix the problem that they told you existed. I'm going to deal with their case in 3 sections. First, I'm going to talk about the principles in today's debate. Our governmental principle, our obligation, and the feminist principle, what they actually care about. Second of all, we're going to talk about the short-term effects of affirmative action. And thirdly, we're going to talk about the long-term effects. I'll show you how, on all accounts, side opposition wins this debate conclusively. So without further ado, let's run into the principles. Let's talk about what feminists actually want. Because what they told you is that feminists just want equality, right? But their issue is that they never actually understood what equality means or analyzed it any further than a raw, blanket, generalized egalitarian principle. Because the equality that feminists value is not about the quality of the mechanism, it's not about just everyone being regarded as equal or else, this absolutist idea. What feminists specifically want is what we told you earlier, right? Feminists want the opportunities for women and men to be equal. They want women to have the choice to be able to lead their own lives, at least as much choice as men. And they want women to have empowerment such that they can be on equal standing to men. When men and women have that in the same society, when men and women have the same chance of being hired for the same job, that's when the equality exists. The equality does not exist currently because only 7% of the CEOs in the world are female.
And all that
they keep on asserting that they care about equality, but never actually told you how they get there. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that they still have not responded to our principle earlier. The principle where we told you about the governmental obligation to enforce the equality, right? The only real response that they gave us was that perhaps when you give affirmative action to females, someone who potentially deserved the job more might not get it. We have 3 responses to that, right? 1, we tell you that by our principle, where we said that the government has an obligation specifically to fix social injustices of the past, it is still legitimate to give the job to the woman. They conceded that very obligation when they conceded post-apartheid reparations. 2, I tell you that at the upper levels of employment, there are 50 shades of grey, right? There isn't one applicant who's just incredibly better than the other. Very, very often, the stats are exactly the same. In fact, that's normally the case. It comes down to interviewers' fields. It comes down to how the interviewer engages with you as a person. And we tell you that when the interviewer is a man who is likely to hire 70% men and 30% women, then that's something that needs to be changed, right? We're not necessarily, we're not actually giving jobs to people who deserve them less. We're just changing the bias. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, we actually told you that women are just great at high school. So we think we told you that they're very competent. We think it's pretty unlikely that they're just going to be these incompetent women who get jobs over the very competent men. That's blatantly misogynistic. Please deal with that side of our position. Now let's talk about the efficacy that I've been ranting on about in my POIs, because they still haven't given it to us in today's debate. And the efficacy in today's debate is so very important, because 1, we all agree that we value equality in a society, right? But 2, we all agree that there is a current problem. So the side that gives you efficacy necessarily wins the debate. So let's look at why we did. We told you that in the short-term effects, when you implement affirmative action, women actually get hired. We had no response to that, no contention. I'll take you on to this point. We have no contention on that. We know that women get hired. And we told you that when women get hired, their perceptions of themselves and society's perception of them improves phenomenally. Because all of a sudden, a woman who goes out on a date with a man can pay for her own dinner. All of a sudden a woman can pay for her own tax. All of a sudden a woman can afford to go shopping without borrowing her boyfriend's wallet. That's empowering. That's what changes society.
And on that note,
I'll take you there at this point. The only response we had to this is that women might feel sad about themselves because they feel like they cheated their way in, right? First of all, they still haven't told you a tangible harm, right? They haven't told you how women don't get hired. They just gave you this arbitrary psychological, analysis. But second of all, ladies and gentlemen, we just don't believe their psychological analysis. Why? Because we think for women, it's far, far more damaging when you actually can't even pay for your own food. We'd much prefer a woman who can be financially independent and then maybe sometimes think about the affirmative action as not being so great. We think that that harm doesn't exist. If anything, it exists on their side of the debate where women can't even pay for themselves. But lastly, we don't even think that harmful perception exists at all anyway. Why? Because you still have a meritocracy, right? 50% of society, and in many cases more, are female. You don't just walk into your job with affirmative action. You actually have to compete against other strong women, right? Women are given equal opportunities, but they're not just given free jobs. That's something that they have never understood. I'll take you now.
you continue to bombard this room with statistics about how women are unequal, and you continue to list the benefits of affirmative action. But your team has completely missed the crux of this debate and missed the point about why a feminist would advocate for this affirmative action when a feminist does not want to be distinguished based on their gender. Please address that.
So, let's just clear this up right now. There was never a statement from the official feminist group that said that we don't want to be distinguished on the basis of our gender, because the official feminist group doesn't exist, okay? It's a collection of women with a collection of ideals that say that we just want to be equal in society. It's that simple. And we tell you that until they accept that they don't make women equal in society, they cannot win the debate. Lastly, let's deal with the long-term effects of this policy. We told you that in the long term, women actually get a chance to prove themselves. They get to say that we're worthwhile because all of a sudden we're actually hired. All of a sudden we're doing a good job. You're forced to recognize that. Secondly, we told you that they become entrenched in the workforce because all of a sudden it isn't just men hiring more men. Women can actually hire women now. Men and women can work together. Sexism can't survive in office spaces where women are actually predators. The only response we had to the long-term effects, because this was not dealt with, was that perhaps we undermine other minorities, like black people, who benefit from affirmative action. We tell you, first of all, that's just not really what the debate is about. That's pretty much irrelevant. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, their analysis was that we undermine other minorities because women don't come from disadvantaged backgrounds. I respond by saying, one, not every black person comes from a disadvantaged background. Don't argue in absolutes. That's actually just offensive. Two, every single woman is affected by the pervasive societal perception. That is even more important than in the cases of racial affirmative action, where not every person of color was disadvantaged. And three, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that in the long term, the perceptions of women improve because women get a chance to show that they're valuable in society. Women get a chance to show that they can be independent. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the side that understands equality. This is the side that represents feminism. This is the side that lets women be independent. You must stand on the side of opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'd like to welcome the opposition slide speaker to conclude the debate.
That's the most important aspect of feminism itself. It's not a group of people who want to ignore gender, it's a group of people who want to achieve a better and an equal society. And on that account, we simply won today's debate because we haven't heard much contestation about whether we actually achieve that. We can safely assume, therefore, that through a process of affirmative action, we can actually achieve a society that the average feminist would want to go for. I have three issues that I'm going to address in today's debate. First, what are the goals of the feminist Secondly, who betters that female equality in terms of the short term, and secondly, in terms of the long term. And then my third issue will be the idea that they go forward about making other groups look bad later. So let's deal with the first issue about what the goals of the feminist movement actually are. They basically came up here and told us that the goals of the feminist movement are always to implement some sort of equality as soon as they can in everyday policy. We tell you that that's just not actually true. The overwhelming goals of the feminist movement is trying to achieve some sort of equality. They acknowledge that any kind of discrimination is bad when they gave us that piece of analysis about how we don't want incapable people to get into work positions. And yet they also accepted that currently women must be discriminated against because of the fact that there just aren't enough of them in high position, high paying jobs. So we ask you, if you don't like people being discriminated against, and if you accept that women currently are being discriminated against, why wouldn't you implement something that can hope to change that kind of discrimination? We heard no proper response to that. You can't define affirmative action out of today's debate by saying that that's just not what the feminist movement accepts. You have to tell us mechanistically why this is the feminist movement. You haven't done that, you lose. Let's move on to the second issue about who betters female equality. Firstly, in terms of the short term. We tell you that in the short term, you just give females jobs, you get them money, you get them some sort of benefit from the independence that a lot of money can give you. No response. Secondly, we say that you give them some sort of chance to show themselves, to prove themselves in the workplace. That's important if you want to change perceptions. No response. Thirdly, we tell you that you change the chain of command. Now you have women and men who are hiring people, and eventually we have an equal society whereby we don't have to use affirmative action anymore. No response. So ladies and gentlemen, we've proven to you that we effectively change the lives of the women now, and that's enough to win us today's debate. But let's get on to the long term. We told you that we changed the overall perception of society in terms of pushing women into certain positions. We allow women to pick up jobs that they wouldn't normally go into because they're perceived as masculine. We didn't hear a suspicious response from that either. So we effectively proved that we changed the long term for women as well. We created a more equal society in that way. Lastly, let's deal with the idea that you're making other people look bad. They compared women to disadvantaged groups. We agree, ladies and gentlemen, women are a disadvantaged group in society. We should afford them the same rights that other disadvantaged groups have. But more than that, in terms of making other women who achieved being in high positions when there were these kind of obstacles that we're talking about, we say that those women, just because they had to overcome a lot, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to like the idea that other women will also have to overcome a lot if they want to achieve the same position. Fundamentally, feminism, ladies and gentlemen, is about achieving something, achieving a society in which everyone can be equal within that society. Because this side of the house has conclusively proved to you that we achieve that kind of society, that we help women and that we empower women, I am very proud to stand beside feminism. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the speech. Now finally, I would like to welcome the reply speaker of the government side to conclude this debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's very upsetting today that we have had essentially two different debates. We have had a team proposition that has come towards you today and told you why a feminist specifically would not want affirmative action because it goes against their principles. And then we've had a team opposition that have come up here today and given you a slew of assertions, assumptions, arguments, and statistics crying about why women are unequal in the workforce and advocating for affirmative action. But of course, the problem with their case today is that they have not noted the crux of this debate, which is the feminist movement, which is the acceptance of affirmative action by the feminist movement. Today, we've seen three major points of contention in this debate. Firstly, what is this debate actually about? Secondly, will this lead to a change in perception of women? And third of all, would this actually be accepted by feminists? So if we go to the first one, what is this debate actually about? So if you listen to Team Proposition, what we told you today is why feminists would not accept affirmative action on behalf of women in Western liberal democracy because of the fact that it goes against their fundamentals. We highlighted this in our first speech, and yet it was only really countered by Team Opposition by them saying, well, feminists want equality. So we're just going to have to take their word as gospel. But even though we do agree that feminists want equality, we do not agree that this method, which is discrimination, is actually what feminists really want. Secondly, will this lead to a change in the perception of women? We talked to you today about how we will change the perception of women. It will change the perception from people who can actually do things by themselves to people who need to be accepted, from people who need something to actually do something for them, that need an act that will push them up in the workplace. Team opposition also agreed that this would change the perception of women, but they told you that it would actually make them more valid and people would appreciate them more in the workplace. However, we do not really understand their analysis and cause and effect on this, because we do not understand how by having one person on a higher platform, per se, is actually going to lead to a more positive and equal perception of them. Now finally, how would this be accepted by feminists? We told you today that it would not, because of the fact that it goes against their principles of how gender should not be an issue and should not really be noted in a modern society. But team opposition have come up today and simply told us again and again and again, well, that feminists want equality, and that apparently they would be willing to go through a measure that highlights someone's gender, which goes against their principles, in order to get there. However, we do not agree with this, because we do not agree that the basic principle of feminism, to live in a society where gender does not matter, would actually work towards highlighting the differences between two different genders when it comes to things like places in school and places in the workplace. Now, if we look over what we've actually said today, we've brought to you the principles of feminism, and team opposition haven't really told us about, haven't really counted this. We also told you about how the stereotypes and the bad assumptions about women would be accepted more into society should feminists agree that we should implement affirmative action. But again, they just gave us more and more benefits about affirmative action and statistics about how women are unequal today, but they did not look at this from the point of view of a feminist. They did not look at this from the point of view of someone that does not want to highlight their gender. We have also talked about other minorities, but what they've simply come up today is to say that, well, most women are disadvantaged. So, yeah, we don't really think that that's a constructive argument that can tell us why this will not actually work towards the harm of other minorities when they're trying to apply for things like scholarships and workplaces, because of the fact that women are really dominating the field if you allow feminism to accept affirmative action. So what we see today is two different debates. Side proposition advocating for affirmative action, which is not actually what the motion specifies. The motion specifies about a feminist point of view on affirmative action. We on team proposition have given this to you, giving you reasoning to this and analysis. However, team opposition have just decided to tell you about affirmative action, and therefore that is why we think our point stands and theirs have fallen, and we're not